Jade War, the sequel to Jade City by Fonda Lee. This has been one I kind of was like, all right, I'll put off reading the sequel because I got a bunch of other stuff I got to get to, some really great books sent to me early. Then I couldn't help myself. I found out the Green Bone Saga, the series this takes place in, is being adapted to a show, and I was like, no, I gotta catch up. I need to read this right now because new favorite. Spoiler alert for this review, new favorite, for many reasons. Let's get into why. For those of you who didn't watch my review of Jade City, I'll give you a brief synopsis of the setting this takes place in. We are following clan warfare between these families that are essentially so powerful, they are the dominant forces within the country they reside. There's a government, of course, but there's a ton of corruption, yada, yada, yada. You're not following good people. This is the Godfather of fantasy, essentially, and I'll also maintain on a similar level of storytelling. It's just magnificent. Continuing, we have Jade War, which picks up after the first book that kind of has a theme of the next generation taking over, and Jade War is now they've taken over, let's see how they perform. And it's even better than Jade City. I gave Jade City a 9 out of 10. Guess where this is going? I loved Jade War so dearly. These characters we have come to care about, Shay, Hilo, Andon, magnificent. Now what's funny though is my favorite character from this book I now hate, but in a good way, like a earned development style, and some of my like, oh yeah, I like them, but not my favorite characters are now to the forefront, top of my list. Especially Andon. He's probably my favorite of this book. It just shines so brightly with Fonda Lee's character work and her world building whenever we're following him, because not getting into spoilers, he's in a new country for us to explore. And I want to hit on that really hard here because Fonda Lee has done an even better job than in her first book of world building. Because while the first book was hyper-focused in these countries these clans live in, the sequel is definitely branching out and fleshing out the world around them and how that world perceives our people who have such a dominant control over the magical source of this land. It's interesting to me how many boxes this book checks that my fans are constantly asking me for. So if you're one of these people who's been leaving comments like, Daniel, what's a good book that's not like, oh, the world ending stakes, it's more of a personal story. This is family versus family clan warfare. It's not we're going up against the big dark lord, it's more of a we're struggling as a family unit. I've also had comments, people saying I want more of a family-based relationships. What's like the sibling stuff going on, parental. Bam, right here, taking that on. Brutal, intense action without being over the top grimdark, bam, right here. Fast pace, bam, right here. Detailed world building, right here. Hard magic system that's not just another Sanderson clone, right here. This series is going to shoot to the top of my fantasy recommendations. It's definitely the strongest 1-2 punch for the start of a series I've read in a long time, and the shockingly few number of people who have read this is a bit concerning. All right, but let's get into the details of Jade War here. So the new generation is coming to run the clan. We are seeing, I'm not going to spoil, I can't really talk about without spoilers what everyone's position is, but this cast of characters set up in the first book really take charge. And it's about their slips and stumbles and corruption arcs, because surprise, surprise, if you work in a criminal family, you're going to be forced to do darker and darker things, and these characters are getting better and better at justifying it to themselves, what they are doing, and that destruction is so beautifully done. It's like this wonderful character, you have this statue of the character in front of you that you love, and you're watching it burn. It's dramatic, it's intense. I could not stop reading it. I literally had a moment with Hilo's character where I was laying in bed listening to this book, and there's a scene where he does something, and I just audibly said out loud, "You son of a." I was so angry at him, but it was so justified and perfect for the story. There was also a scene with Andon specifically where the love he felt and the sacrifice he was making just hit me so hard because I've been in similar situations, and it's just like not similar in a lot of ways, but sacrificing kind of ways and it's just, connection. Loved it. Jade War also is an extraordinarily strong example of how small efforts in certain areas from authors can have tremendous payoff, whether it's small notes about the world around the characters that seem insignificant but definitely help immerse you better, or just small character things that once you realize how exactly that's happening, you pay close enough attention. Every small step makes perfect sense because we're not seeing grand leaps in any direction. We're seeing people who are walking human paths, and it feels so intimate because Fonda Lee does not pull her punches and getting you as close to in these characters' heads as possible, while also having what can only be described as like a dry, dispassionate voice in some way. I have a hard time quantifying that, but I never found this to be sappy, but it's extremely raw and real with what its characters are feeling in these high stakes emotional sequences. So it's this great balance of like you're right there, but it doesn't feel like you're being told how to feel. You have a natural reaction to what you're being told, and I think Fonda Lee is extremely good at directing your emotional, compass. Sure. I actually don't think I touched on this in the first book review also. Fonda Lee's depiction of combat is addictive. She has a great balance of brutal action, but she's not slowing down the pace, which a lot of authors do to over-describe things. Also, this kind of faster approach to action, to me, feels more real in a way, because if you're in a violent situation, your brain is just going into hyper overdrive, so you're not processing it all. So having the voice be brutal, but not overly detailed, also just enhances that feeling of realism. Also, with this being clan warfare, oftentimes the action is the literary equivalent of just and then it's over, and with Fonda Lee very clearly in the first book showing us that no one is off limits. Characters you're attached to and love can die no matter how much potential they have. It just raises the tension throughout because there's continually scenes where things don't go the way you think they will. And, oh, wait, this is going to be high drama? Actually, no. A lot of that. And then there's just never a feeling of complete safety because of the establishment of her willingness to, as I said, touch anybody. And that's actually, I think, the final real, detailed point I want to get into here. Jade War, even more so than Jade City, just felt like one of the most real fantasy stories I've ever read. Everything just kind of comes extremely close to the surface, wanting to jump out of the pages and into your mind. There's just this eagerness to learn more, to feel more with these characters, to see where things are going to go next. And that's because you can almost forget this is a fantasy story. It's fantasy minimalism. There is this harder magic system, there's all this stuff going along, but it's a modern urban setting, right? Like there's cars, there's planes, there's phones. And if you just extract a couple things instead of being fantasy, it would just feel like a alternate world fiction. But I like that. It works for this kind of mafia, yakuza, Godfather-inspired story. I do want to also hit on that these are some of the best corruption arcs I've seen displayed, because a lot of corruption arcs, in my experience, tend to go over the top, over dramatic, reaching for the stars in terms of just emotional heights to justify someone going through trauma and then, ending up on the darker side of things. That's not what's happening in Jade War. Yes, there are extreme emotional highs, but the characters' reactions seem like baby steps and just kind of slight givings of morality, just justify it this time, leading up to these larger moments and a very natural crescendo. I genuinely felt this book is painful and heartbreaking because of that. It's just such an intimate walk through this narrative. I genuinely love all the main cast of characters, but I'm simultaneously repulsed by them, especially Hilo in this book. Not to get into details, but I hate him now. And Shay, I went from feeling sorry for her to now being conflicted. It's this confusing mess with her character that I do pity her, but I also see her current situation as a result of her own actions in a lot of ways. Not completely, and I definitely do feel bad for her still, but it's just like, yeah, you kind of walked a path, man. Andon is now one of my favorite characters. His role is cranked up very high for this entry, and I loved kind of going through his smaller story that very naturally weaves into the larger narrative. It also provided a lot of thematic balance back and forth of what's going on closer with the family versus what's going on with Andon. I like that separation and reflection. Honestly, my biggest complaint is the narrator, because I did the audiobook and then kind of went out and bought the physical because I wanted it so bad. He kind of went over the top with some of when you're going up against the bad guy voices. There was a little bit of over the topness there that was like, I mean, that's not how the story hits me, right? Because this is a story where in our interview with Fonda Lee, she specifically said, I want it so you're reading a story where if you go to the other side of things and watch this family from the outside, they're the bad guys. And yeah, everyone here is kind of evil. So having this narrator who just goes evil voice for anyone who's kind of on the other side of things felt a bit inappropriate for the story, but he also just did a very good job overall. It's one stylistic choice I just didn't vibe with. Outside of that, I just love Jade War. This is a glowing review. I have no larger complaints. It's original, it's well-paced, it hits different, it's well-written, the prose are solid through and through, not overly poetic or anything, but rock solid. Jade City, Jade War, probably in my top 10 series of all time now, and I'll be eagerly awaiting Jade Legacy, and I'm so confident Fonda Lee's going to do a good job, because if that first book was A New Hope, this is definitely Empire Strikes Back, and I have a feeling Jade Legacy, the third book, will be more solid in comparison to Green Bone Saga than Return of the Jedi was for Star Wars. 9.5 out of 10 for Jade War, and a very high likelihood that upon some meditation on it, I could bump it up to a 10 out of 10, which is not something I often do at all. This was brilliant. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think of the Green Bone Saga in the comments down below. Do you like this more smaller, intimate story that's just family versus family with a lot of ties into larger government stuff? Or are you still someone who wants to see the old Dark Lord and the Mighty Wizards, which you're not necessarily going to get here? Let me know in the comments down below. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here, and have a good one, y'all. Peace! And of course, I'd like to record a special shout out to my latest high-tier Patreon, Inka Renunen. Hope I said that right, and I hope you are having a wonderful close to your week, because while I'm recording this on Thursday, I believe you're getting it Saturday.